Yes, we can.
All right, great. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Cloud Native Madison's April meetup. Happy to have you all here. Quick reminder, the organizers of this are Kurt Rakeley, myself, Brandon Tim, and Steve Lowry. If you have any questions about the meetup or you'd be interested in speaking, please feel free to reach out to us. You can do so through our CNCF chapter page or on Twitter or meetup as well. We can be messaged. Let me actually put this in slideshow mode. A couple of quick updates from the CNCF space. So a couple of graduations. So the first one I want to talk about is Cade Native graduated to incubating status within the CNCF. And just wanted to quickly plug that back in June 2020, we had Ray Sang, a developer advocate from Google, give a great talk on Cade Native. For those of you who may not be familiar, Cade Native is kind of an attempt to port some of the serverless methodologies to Kubernetes itself. And so, essentially, if you're willing to kind of build your application in a more opinionated way, you can kind of deploy it and run it within Kubernetes with a very minimum amount of boilerplate compared to maybe a normal deployment. It also allows you to leverage some operational patterns that aren't really native to Kubernetes itself, such as scale down to 0. So great to see that project moving up and on. And like I said, you can find that video out on our Cloud Native channel on YouTube. The next project that graduated to incubating is in-toto. So this is actually a project from NYU, and in-toto is all around supply chain security, which seems like it's something that's really kind of picking up a lot of steam in the CNCF space. So supply chain security is really all around being able to audit and validate how a piece of software was built, tested, packaged, and ultimately distributed. So it's good to see that coming on board. You can find more on their website, in-toto.io, I believe. And finally, kind of the reason that we asked Himanshu to come in and give a talk today, Backstage, the developer portal project from Spotify, has also graduated to incubating. So we're very excited to hear from Himanshu today more about that. Wanted to plug some upcoming conferences. So IstioCon is coming up later this month. It is virtual and multilingual. They've got a lot of tracks, both English and Chinese. There's about a full week-long agenda of talks. So if you're interested in the service mesh space, definitely recommend taking a look at that. Another interesting conference that kind of came up in the cloud native space is Platform Con, which is really kind of about taking all the cloud native pieces and trying to assemble more developer friendly platforms on top of those. So that's going to be totally virtual. It's happening June 9th through 10th, and you can find more information about that at Platform Con. And finally, a little bit later this year, but wanted to plug it, Cloud Native / KubeCon is coming up in October. That is going to be a hybrid event this year. It's been virtual for the last 2 years, but it's going to be on premise in Detroit. But if you want to tune in virtually, you can do that as well. Main reason I wanted to plug that is because the call for papers is open, and that's not going to close until the end of May. But if you're considering, maybe giving a talk, and I've submitted there in the past, that can be anything from a 5-minute lightning talk to a more long form, kind of 45-minute long talk. You can go ahead and find more details on the Cloud Native site, and I think it'd be great if we found some representation from the Madison group to actually give a speech there. So other quick business, our next meetup is going to be May 5th. We're starting to put some feelers out and see who amongst kind of our partners may have an appetite for hosting us on site. If it doesn't happen on site in May, we'll probably be continuing to look at June as people get more and more confident about kind of the state of the world, hopefully. We are also still seeking speakers. So one kind of topic prompt that we'd love to hear somebody give a talk on is Crossplane, which is really trying to build kind of an abstract contract in front of cloud infrastructure for developers to make that easier to consume no matter what kind of backend technologies or backend clouds you want to deploy to. Or if there's anything else that interests you in the cloud native space or adjacent to the cloud native space, as I said earlier, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Steve, or Kurt, either through the CNCF website or Meetup or Twitter or whatever works best for you. With no further ado, we want to welcome today's speaker, Himanshu Mishra. Himanshu is a developer advocate at Spotify. He's based in Stockholm, Sweden. We're very pleased to be able to bring him in here virtually today. You can see all of his Twitter, GitHub, and LinkedIn handles there. And Himanshu is going to be talking about how Backstage makes developers happy at Spotify. So with that, I will stop sharing and hand it over to Himanshu.
Thank you, Brendan. Let me share my screen. I have a few slides. That's lying. I have lots of slides, but I'll try to speed up and cover my slides in like 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll go right into the demo and we'll look at Backstage open source as well as how Backstage is deployed at Spotify. And I'll show you all the secrets and how much Spotify pays for cloud costs. No, I'll try to keep it at overview level. But thank you for coming and thanks for inviting. I'm Himanshu. I'm based in Stockholm, Sweden. It's currently snowing outside. It snows a lot here. But I moved here almost 2 years ago. I joined as a software engineer in Spotify. And even before joining Spotify, around March 2020, an open source project was, I stumbled across it, and it was called Backstage. It had about 500 stars on GitHub and lots of good first issues. And so I contributed to the project, and I basically loved the idea that there is a project which focuses on developer experience and how it's not just about developers are able to do something, it's also about how happy they are while they do it. So I loved the idea and talked to the team and basically applied and later joined Spotify, and I've been working on it ever since. What is this Backstage thing? So as we like to define it, Backstage is an open platform for building developer portals. I'll define this later on, but it was created at Spotify and open source in March 2020, created almost 6 years ago. So it's a product that has been evolving for a long time. Since open sourcing it, Backstage has now become an incubated project at CNCF. This happened about a month ago, and it was a sandbox project with great momentum, to be honest. But what the heck is a developer portal? So let's back up a second and talk about it. It's a fairly new category, new product category, and so it's good to explain about it. So Backstage can be considered what's known as an IDP. Brenda was mentioning about Platform Con, and they talk a lot about what is an internal developer platform. But yeah, let's keep the focus on just developer portals and why they are important. But so first of all, you might have heard this phrase that software is eating the world. It is still is eating the world. And there's an explosion of available technologies. I mean, if you just look at the CNCF, you might have seen it already. There's something called CNCF landscape. It's like a big picture and has like hundreds of technologies available for logging and monitoring and deployment and CI/CD and so on. And as you can imagine, it's quite difficult to learn them all in depth and keep track of how it fits in your stack and learn this interfaces and particular languages and so on. And inside your company, your whole stack is getting more complex, and things like onboarding of a new engineer and collaboration can become more challenging. So a developer portal is more, it is basically a single pane of glass for all kinds of infrastructure, complex, all kinds of tools that you have inside. So things like your CI/CD, deployment, monitoring of your Kubernetes cluster, security tools, finding out what new alerts do you have and what do you have to fix, testing, if you use tools like Lighthouse or whatever you have. Developer Portal is basically integrates all your services, all the applications that you have inside, all the data workflows, all the libraries that you publish internally, and you can get to see which teams manage them, which teams are responsible for them. Docs, the Backstage is where, or developer portal, we're still talking about developer portals, is where you would read all the technical documentation. And specifically for those services, if you have APIs internally, you would actually explore the APIs documentation right then and there, and we'll see all of it in demo later on. All in one place, regardless of how or where the individual components are actually running or who manages them. So that's what developer portal is supposed to be. A single pane of glass for all of your infrastructure. So every development shop like Spotify roughly wants three things. Speed without compromising safety, scale without compromising quality, and the ability to tame their increasingly chaotic software ecosystem. So that's what Spotify wanted as well back 6 years ago. And if Spotify was able to tame the chaos and improve developer effectiveness with Backstage, we think it could work at most places. But let's go back to year 2016. Spotify was in a hyper growth mode, expanding from a music streaming app to a highly personalized audio experience. But onboarding new engineers was becoming hyper confusing. They were focused on speed to market, yet their teams were slowing down because of internal fragmentation. And if you've heard the word fragmentation, and if you have not heard the word fragmentation, it basically means teams are creating things based on different stacks, and then eventually find out that one team cannot collaborate with other because they don't know the particular technology the other team decided to use. While the headcount was increasing inside Spotify, the individual developer effectiveness metrics kept going down. And specifically, we have one metric to track this. It's when a new engineer joins the company, how much time it takes for them to create their 10th PR. And that number was 60 days. So it's almost 2 months. So Spotify built this developer portal, what we now know as Backstage, to tame the chaos. That changed everything, aligning a distributed, autonomous culture, bringing together hundreds of squads, we like to call teams as squads, thousands of engineers, and tens of thousands of software components. Backstage at Spotify now enables better collaboration, unlocks collective potential, and empowers teams to do what they do best. So, what are the main features of Backstage? And we like to divide this into three verticals. So, Backstage lets you create new software in seconds, aligned to your best practices, so that your developers don't cause fragmentation and they get the best support when they need it. Backstage lets you manage all the software that you own or the teams own in one centralized location. And Backstage lets any engineer explore the entire software ecosystem inside a company, enabling collaboration across your organization. So your engineering org consists both people and software. And the global developer population is growing and will grow massively in the coming years. And we believe that this will also be true for your organization if you're planning to scale up. And if you're doing that, you'll need to handle this growth of both people and complexity that comes with it. And ideally, you can leverage the power of open source through plugins, through Backstage plugins, and the world of support from this fast growing community. And Backstage has this. So Backstage has a Discord server, which has about 5,000 members, and there's about 500 members always online. So if you ask a question about Backstage or developer effectiveness or developer portals in general, you always have people from different organizations chiming in with opinions. But Backstage and the way Backstage is built is it has a plugin-based architecture. So you don't basically buy or download Backstage as one software and then run it. You basically compose Backstage, or you compose your developer portal based on the core platform, which is Backstage, but also the plugins that can be built on top of it. And I'll show you some examples. And we feel like this is how developer portals should be. Every organization has different needs. Every organization has a unique culture, and there is no one size suits fit. There's no one size that fits everyone. So developer portals need to be customizable. This is how it looks. It's just a screenshot. Don't worry, I'm going to do some hands-down demo of Backstage, but this is the homepage of Backstage at Spotify. It starts with search. You get to see what what things you accessed recently. There's a bunch of things that you can go to, but this is very unique, and Backstage at different companies look differently, and it's totally up to them how they want to customize it. It's their developer portal after all, and they don't even need to call it Backstage. And to give some names, American Airlines adopted Backstage, and then they are an airline company, and they call their Backstage Runway. And so other companies, they team Backstage according to their own brand and their own culture, and yeah, you can give it whatever name you like. Let me touch a bit on open source. Backstage is an open source community. There's about 800 contributors who have contributed code to Backstage, but thousands of people who have contributed ideas and helped the maintainers build it, basically. So the teams at Spotify depend on the internal version of Backstage every single day. It's a tier 1 service. It can't go down. It's considered mission critical to the company. And we believe the best way to ensure Backstage's future was open sourcing it, so that there is no other open source developer portal in the future. And we have to basically replace all the work we did for like 6 years with this alternative. So we thought, why not just get started and open source Backstage to ensure it stays here. So I showed a quote before: software is eating the world, but open source is basically eating the software world. Proprietary softwares are being replaced by open source alternatives because companies see the advantages of using open source software. Also because traditional open source companies are playing a less critical role, and open source innovations are now happening at companies like Google, Facebook, profit-making companies, and as well as Spotify. It can also play an important role in attracting and retaining talent. I, for one, joined Spotify because I found out about their open source project. So it's quite meta for me to be talking about this. But your developers will basically value collaboration and interaction with a large, healthy community, continuous community support, and the ability to basically use what the community has built, so your product keeps growing faster. Some numbers, and we love these numbers. So Backstage has 15,000 stars on GitHub. There's more than 100 companies who have publicly listed themselves as Backstage adopter, but there's definitely more companies who are evaluating Backstage and trying it out and seeing if it fits their culture. Some companies, as you can see in this logo, and one good thing is that Backstage is good for like different industries. So it's not just music, media, airlines, e-commerce, and so on. So yeah, and there is a public list on GitHub. If you go to Backstage on GitHub, you would find an adopters.md file. So if you are a Backstage adopter, feel free to add yourself in there. Otherwise, you can check the list yourself. Before we dive into how Backstage works technically, I would like to show you around because I've been talking for a lot of time. So let me stop sharing my tab. And let me share a window. All right. So I have 2 tabs open here. So this is the open source Backstage. If you just download git clone Backstage repository, this is what you would get. And this is Backstage at Spotify. And I'll show both of them parallelly. But if you remember, there were 3 main pillars, and there are 3 main pillars what Backstage supports. It's you create new things from Backstage. You manage your things on Backstage, and you explore your software ecosystem inside your org at Backstage. So let me first start with create. So I'm an engineer. I start at this company. Let's call it the Bird Company. And my team wants me to create a new website, and the website should have XYZ, and it should have this much content and whatnot. Now, this company is huge, and there's about 150 Kubernetes cluster in there. And I have to create a new namespace. I have to create a new GCP project or AWS account, like depends on the cloud company you're using. I have to make sure I'm using the stack which company uses. There's so many things. Like I have to set up CI/CD for it. I have to set up monitoring for it, on call if it's needed. So you have to go through a lot of knowledge barriers before you're able to deploy something without basically patting a lot of people's backs. So at Spotify or any company using Backstage, the idea here is that you as a new engineer would go to create and would go to create a new component. Um, you have the option to create basically a lot of things. So if you want to create a backend service, and it depends on what kinds of technologies you want to use. So Java, Python, Scala, etc. If you are a data engineer and if you'd like to create some data workflows based on different stacks, you have software templates for them. I was talking about website, and there we go. So you have a bunch of templates for creating a new website. I'm scrolling too fast, but sorry, I was trying to reach there. There we go. And then I just choose one of them. I fill in some details. Let's say my website is called Bird Marketing, something, something, a new fancy website. And I choose that my team is the owner or I am the owner. I choose where it should go. I choose some compliance to-dos, like whether my website is going to have some personal identifier information or not. GDPR is fun. Some things like Kubernetes role of this site. This role is used for things like whether the secret should be revealed or whatnot. What GCP project ID should this be deployed to, and what Kubernetes namespace this should be deployed to. And once I fill this information, I just hit next, and the website gets created. And then the magic happens. So let me do this live on the open source version. I don't want to add new services inside Spotify. So let me pick one. Let's see, create React SSR template. Let me call this test CNCF Madison website. Owner Acme Corp. Let me publish this to my own personal GitHub account. So this feature is called as software templates inside Backstage. So the idea here is that inside your org, you could be part of a group called Technology Advisory Group or TAG, or any group basically who decides what technology stack should we use inside this company. Do we allow engineers to use basically any programming language they want to, or basically let's pick a few and then only depend on them? So you create these templates for your engineers to basically use and create new services with. And in these templates, you basically define how a new CI/CD workflow is set up. You define how to create a new monitoring service inside, let's say, if you have Grafana or any other tool. How security checks should be done, how on-call rotation is managed on PagerDuty. Basically, anything that goes into creating a new service, you package that as a software template. And your new engineer only has to fill in few details, and that thing gets created. So they don't have to worry a lot about knowing what goes behind into creating these integrations. So my software was created a long time ago. There's this new repository that it created. So all these files were part of the part of the software template. Um, and it also gets registered inside Backstage. So that's the second pillar I want to talk about. Manage, that you manage your own services. Now, if I've created this website, I want to track it. I want to track basically the metadata. Who owns it? Basically, this is my team. But what if someone else who's interested in knowing about this site inside the company, or a service inside this company, they can come to Backstage and they can find out that Acme Corp is the name of the team who owns it, and this is their Slack channel, etc. Now, this is what we called this is what we call a software catalog inside Backstage. It's a core plugin, and it's basically a service registry. You have registered all your services in here. So the first page is just an overview, and you can technically add anything in here, but everything related to this service should be accessible in here. So for example, if you need to read documentation about this new service or API, how about just navigating over to the docs tab and looking at it? What if you want to look at the CI/CD builds and what happened lately? You can come in here and do that. What if you want to check how it's deployed on Kubernetes? How many clusters is it deployed on? What's the namespace? What's the status of pods, etc. Since I didn't deploy it anywhere on Kubernetes, the open source version is not going to have a meaningful data. But let me show you inside Spotify where we can find a meaningful demo. So this is a service internally. And if I navigate to the deployments tab, I can see details about its deployment. So I can see it's deployed to 3 regions, 3 clusters. And right from here, I can basically check its logs. It's going to take me there. Or I can connect to this pod on GCP. The best demo I can't show right now, but if you redeploy it, you can actually see pods being deployed, like these dots appear, like, hey, new pod is being created, and the old ones are getting deleted, and so on. But the idea basically is that you do all of this on Backstage, and you don't have to know about Kubernetes and know about the particular kubectl commands to do this. If you're just an engineer trying to create something in your company's app or website or so on. As I said, CI/CD, you can check logs from here. Something failed in here, I'll have to take a look. But there's so many other things that you do on Backstage, and it depends on your company. But I, for example, add the secrets, some environment variables in here right from Backstage, and I don't have to learn about how to add a secret in Kubernetes, and it's done right from here. We have some lots of in-house tools. One of them is Cost Insights. Let me show a better example of Cost Insights. This is how we find out how much our services are costing us, and if there's anything we need to be worried about. Let me pick this group, which has some meaningful data. Right. This is also an open source plugin, by the way. If you go to backstage.io, which is the homepage of the project, you can find the plugin marketplace, and you can find all the plugins that exist. A lot of them are created by Spotify, but majority is from the community. And this one is called Cost Insights. All right, but demo. So trends, what changed lately that your team is incurring more costs? And some, like, I don't know much about cost insights, but I'm sure managers love to look at these graphs and understand how many engineers we can save, maybe by fixing some of the alerts in here. Maybe you have a service which you forgot, but it's still running and not being used. So these things appear on cost insights, and you can visualize them. All right. I want to demo docs because I promised that um, our engineers read documentation on Backstage. And while I'm at docs, there's one really nice concept I like about Spotify's engineering culture that I want to demo, and they are called golden paths. So Spotify is really invested in making sure when new engineers join the company, their experience is very nice and they can get started really fast. So for that, Spotify has golden paths for them. So let's say if you're a backend engineer, what you would do is you would just, in your first week, you would go through the golden path for backend engineering. And this is basically a bunch of steps which is going to make you create a new service, but also learn a bit about how things are structured inside Spotify. So, and this is very up to date. Engineers update them. We have engineers joining basically every other week. So they get battle tested as well. And if you, as a reader, think like, hey, I don't think this piece of documentation is up to date. What do I do here? So you can directly report to the documentation writer that, hey, I feel like this is outdated. I'm just showing a few features of this plugin called TikToks, where you read documentation. You can find out who wrote them, when was it last updated, which team owns it, but also like top contributors. What's the Slack channel where I should reach out if I have issues with this tutorial and whatnot, etc. So yeah, that is tech docs. You can also edit this documentation. Like if you click this button, you can find the source where it exists. Last thing on documentation, there's this concept called docs like code, which basically says that you should write your documentation as you write your code. So all of our technical documentation exists inside the project itself, just in Markdown files, and Backstage aggregates them and shows them. Let's see. I've shown you create, manage, golden path. Let me show you a few things about explore. So back to Backstage. Of course, you can search for things inside inside Spotify, inside Backstage, and like inside your own engineering culture. So if I want to search for, let's say, a data set, user listening something something. So this is where I search. Yeah, search for it. I add my filters, and then maybe something useful would come up. Maybe a data set that I can use to do my work. Yeah, so you can search across all documentations like GKE. We have GKE internally, and I can search documentation for it, and I can just start learning about how Kubernetes is used at Spotify. So yeah, you can explore things. It's mostly docs, but you can explore all the other platforms you have inside your company, hubs, SDKs. It gets quite specific to the company, but basically, it's the idea here is that your engineer should be able to explore your engineering culture. That's pretty much it on my demo, and I don't want to go around and click on things, but there's a lot of things in here. Like the data hub in itself is huge. If you're a data engineer and want to do something with, like, let's say, music data or artist data and so on, you can just come here and just explore and get some ideas and learn about what is possible and which teams you can reach out to work on something. All right. So let's move on. Right. So little bit, let's take 5 more minutes and let's talk a bit about like how Backstage works behind the scenes. So some concepts of Backstage and basically how it's structured for everyone. So there's this core. There's 3 terminologies we like to call. There's this core of Backstage, which is just let's say the backend and the front end, and pretty much that's it. Like it's quite empty, but that's the core. Like the CLI is included inside, but using using those core tools, all companies or any adopter basically creates their Backstage app. So a good example is Create React app, if you have heard of it. You create a new website using React. So that's how Backstage is structured as well. You have your own Backstage app, you commit it using Git, you maintain it, you update it using Yarn or NPM, whatever you'd like. But that's your Backstage app, and it consists of plugins. That's the third thing, is you keep adding these new pieces of functionalities to your Backstage app. So let's say if you're not interested in, let's say, cost insights, you just don't add that plugin. If you're not interested in managing documentation, you just don't add that plugin. So it can be just software catalog or software templates or any one thing that you like to use, and then you keep adding plugins to it. So that's the idea, and that's what we recommend to Backstage adopters as well, is start simple but strategic. So you don't try to use everything that Backstage community has to offer. You only start with one problem that you feel your engineering org is facing and try to solve it. I don't want to go too deep into this, but inside Spotify, there is a core team, let's say, and it has about 5 people, like 5 engineers working on it, and that's it. So 5 engineers are maintaining Backstage platform, but there's about hundreds of teams who have built about 150 Backstage plugin over these years inside Spotify. So if you're trying to adopt Backstage, there's going to be a very central platform team who's going to own the platform and make sure Backstage is deployed. But if you need to have a plugin to serve your data engineers, it has to come from the data organization. If you need to have a plugin which shows you things about your deployment, your Kubernetes stuff, it has to come from that particular team. So that's the idea, is that Backstage in itself is a platform, and it means that your teams will come and use that platform to build new plugins, new tools for either themselves or for a specific set of users inside your company. This is more into how softwares or components are registered inside Backstage. So you can register basically anything. So a website or a library or any kind of service. But you can also register things like some abstractions, like inside Spotify, there's about 20 services responsible for creating, let's say, playlists. So you can combine all of those services inside a domain called playlist. Things like that. So you have a better understanding of how the services interact with each other, or how your entire ecosystem looks like. You can add more things like APIs, but also users and groups. This is where it gets interesting. You can use Backstage to manage all like employees inside your org, or create new groups or teams inside your org. And this eventually is important, because You need to know which team owns which services. So you need to have an understanding of what teams exist inside your org. And the last point, relationship graph, is that you can define which services are connected with other services, and you define them in these things called YAML files, because engineers have forgotten to write code and all we do is write YAML files. But no, joking aside, this is true for Backstage as well, is all the metadata lives inside YAML files. And this is one example of if you have a service and if you want to register it inside Backstage, it will contain a YAML. And if you come from the Kubernetes world, this might look familiar to you. But yeah, it will have a name, it will have a kind, component, service, library, etc. Few links, some description, some information about the team, etc. The good thing is that you don't write these YAML files like as an engineer, because when you're creating new things, you create them using software templates. If you have Backstage already, and if you have created something using software templates, you already get a YAML and it's already ingested. So I don't spend my time writing Backstage YAMLs in my daily life if I'm an engineer. Software templates, then software templates, as you saw, you can basically bake in your org's best practices. You can kind of continuously update these over time, and these automatically get registered in the software catalog when you build new software. So you can make sure if your engineer is creating new websites, they're using the latest version of React or Next.js, or things are not getting old. Or creating new services, they're relying on MySQL version 10 and not 6 or 14. Like I'm saying that there's a consistency inside your org if you have templates to use. Plugins, as you saw, anything can be a plugin inside Backstage. It can just be a page, cost insights, for example. Plugins are NPM packages, so they are bundled separately. And they can be backend plugins as well, for doing things that needs like server and compute capacity. So yeah, the core is basically, as I said, very small. CLI, reading some configs here and there, the core UI, theme, etc. Not trying to go deep into tech. If you're looking to contribute to Backstage, then only I think this is useful. But yeah, there's basically 3 types of plugins that exist. One is it's just a front-end plugin. So you just go to Backstage, visit a page, and then you see some information. There's a plugin which is backend, front-end and backend. So let's say you need to store some information. You would need a database. So your plugin needs to have a backend so that it can connect to a database. And the third type is that you already have a backend. So let's say you need to show some information from Circle CI, your CI/CD provider. So Backstage supports these proxy backends as well. So your front-end plugin can call your external services via these proxies. I want to skip how documentation works. Search is also included. You can search across your engineering org, so it doesn't have to be only things that lives inside Backstage. You can expand Backstage search to also search in, let's say, your Confluence or your Google Calendar, or whatever you want to search, like Slack, any extra service which provides an endpoint. So Backstage search is also extensible. I'm running out of time, so I want to take some questions and I want to skip deployment. But yeah, you can deploy Backstage using Kubernetes or just regular things like AWS Fargate or what have you. Yeah, so last slide. Where do you start using Backstage? You just try it out. Go to backstage.io. There's a getting started doc. Run the command. You have a Backstage app. Just see how it feels. Then you get into phase 2, which we like to call proof of concept, is that you engage with some teams, let's say just one team, and then you try to ingest their data into Backstage and see if that helps in their day-to-day life, and see, like, create a proof of concept and basically try to sell it to your engineering leadership. And the third phase is basically a partnership phase where you bring in 10, 15 teams inside your company and try to make them use Backstage, and then you'll find more problems that you can solve using Backstage. And finally, if you have bought in, if Backstage is the developer portal inside your org, you would get into evangelizing phase, which is all the, maybe you have 500 engineers, maybe 100 engineers, maybe 1,000 engineers. You would go into trying to make them use Backstage and trying to make them, show them how it can help ease their life and not be overwhelmed by the complexity of your infrastructure. Some links, backstage.io, backstage.spotify.com for more opinionated things. And there's the community sessions we host, and the link to find that. We also have a Discord server, which you can join. And that's pretty much it. I would like to take questions. Let me stop sharing.
Fantastic, Himanshu. Thank you so much. It's a really exciting project. I mean, it's, obviously it kind of starts as a blank slate and you can kind of choose your own adventure in terms of what functionality you want to deploy there. That's really exciting. We do have a number of questions from the community, so I'm just going to go through these from the text chat. The first is from Sadiq asking, is there a company size below which Backstage's costs or benefits may not be as worth it?
That's a really good question. The number, of course, is vague, but there exists a number where, let's say you only have 10 engineers, then those 10 engineers know everything that exists inside the company. But what if you have 100 engineers, then you would like some of them to not know about everything. So I would imagine the number between 10 and 100 when you should invest in a developer portal.
Sure. Great. You ever written a custom plugin?
Sure. Me, as part of job, is to write plugins. So the TechDocs plugin is what I heavily invested in, but there are other plugins that I contribute to, like software templates and so on. But I have seen people write custom plugins like to-do app. So if your source code has a lot of to-dos, the plugin would aggregate all of those to-dos and show you.
Very cool. Jonathan asks, if Backstage is your source of truth, is the data available to get out via API calls? And if so, are those APIs relatively consistent across plugins?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Backstage is my source of truth in a lot of cases. So Backstage is supposed to be a single pane of glass to all the services that exist. So let's say you have data about CI/CD that doesn't live inside Backstage. It lives with your CI/CD provider. Deployment data, it lives in your Kubernetes clusters. You would directly use them. So Backstage is supposed to aggregate these and show you these, but most of these data live inside services built for them. For things that are Backstage originated, yes, Backstage backends have APIs. Mainly, it's the software catalog API, which you will be using to get this data.
Fantastic. Couple more questions here. One just bit of housekeeping. Are you going to share these slides? So folks would love to get their hands on your slides.
Absolutely. I'll mail this to you, Brandon. Or
sounds great. We'll post them on our site.
Okay.
Fantastic. And Francisco asks, is the open source version ready to support user permissions, for example, via access control lists?
It's a great question. This is something we've been working on for the past 6 months. So it does have an authorization framework set up. So you can define your own control list, like you can have an RBAC if you want. But yes, the open source version does support it. It is in alpha, to be honest. And one more pitch is that Spotify is working on paid plugins. So if you go to backstage.spotify.com, you can find more about this. But there is a paid RBAC plugin that Spotify is working on, and it can help you manage this better. But the open source version does support it, and you don't need it, to be honest.
Fantastic. Mario asks, do you have some metrics comparison of the impact of Backstage inside Spotify? So you talked a little bit about that, kind of like time to 10 PRs. Is that kind of your main KPI for the success of Backstage, or are there others?
For Spotify, that's the main, and we reduced that from 60 days to about 15 to 20 days, time to 10th PR. I'm going to paste a link to a blog post, how Expedia tracks it, but every company is going to have a different metric of tracking developer experience. There's another one which I'd like to mention, is that we do an engineering satisfaction survey every 6 months. And we ask the question, how satisfied are you with Backstage? And the latest one has like 88% of engineers are satisfied with the Backstage. So we want that to be like 90 plus and all, but that's one of the metrics we definitely track.
It's not a bad start. As you were talking, I was thinking already internally in my own company, I was thinking like, reduction in number of Slack messages to our various like ask channels, our support channels. I think would be a really interesting metric if you could drive that down, if everything really becomes more discoverable and kind of self-service.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, community, please, we've got 5 more minutes. Please continue to post or in the channel or take yourself off mute if you'd like to ask a question directly to Himanshu. I've got a couple of questions, additional questions here myself that I'm curious about. So we talked a little bit about data in and out, and particularly around what I'm interested in is particularly around Backstage's service catalog. I think some companies out there certainly might not have one yet, and this is like a great out of the box kind of value that they can leverage immediately, and that's great. What about other companies that may already have a service catalog? And this is a very selfish question for me. Zendesk has a fairly mature and highly integrated service catalog internally, and so that's kind of the source of truth. So can you talk a little bit about that experience of using like an external service catalog as a source of truth and bringing that data into Spotify? Are there any kind of like rough edges to that, or things people should look out for?
Sure. We have talked to a lot of adopters who have something like this, that the basic one is a spreadsheet. It's just you keep track of all your services in a spreadsheet, but also like fully built like systems. That's how Spotify evolved Backstage as well, is that we had something called System DB where we used to keep track of all the systems in a database. There are 2 ways that I can think of how you would go about adopting Backstage. Is that you skip the software catalog plugin basically, and you create something custom, just the front end part, where you connect to your software catalog, whatever the custom one you have, and you show them. The second one would be the Backstage software catalog is quite powerful. So it doesn't have to be, the data doesn't have to be ingested from YAML files. You can actually write custom processors and custom ingesters, I think they're called. And it can talk to basically anything. It's a piece of code. So you can talk to your existing service catalog, to its API. It can talk to your cloud provider if that's the way you want to ingest services. It can talk to, the simplest example would be all the repositories inside your GitHub or inside your GitHub Enterprise or whatever source code control you use is a service. So if you automatically want to ingest them, just write few lines of code and ingest all the repositories as services. So you can do all kinds of things and ingest data from custom places as well.
Fantastic. Steve asks, I guess I'll rephrase this a little bit. Have you heard of Roadie.io, which is a software as a service solution for Backstage? And do you have a sense of how ready for prime time that is?
I really don't like to use BS as the short form of Backstage, but no worries. No worries. So Roadie, yes, Roadie is great. They are contributing a lot to Backstage and they've built a lot of things. They do offer a SaaS offering. I personally haven't used them. But try them out. Like David, who's the founder of Roadie, is always active in the community, and you can always find them on Discord. And I think they do like free trials. So see how their offering looks. I think they really help customers get started with Backstage without worrying too much about setup and all.
Thanks. To piggyback on that question, I mean, briefly, you don't have to go into a ton of detail, but what's your kind of perception of the operational complexity of running Backstage? Is it pretty much just run an auto-scaling Kubernetes, deployment set, and it pretty much just works, or are there a lot of operational challenges around it that would push you towards a software as a service solution?
Sure. So I would imagine you definitely need 1 or 2 engineers fully dedicated to Backstage. You need, and I think the most complex thing would be supporting your internal platform. If your engineers inside your company want to build plugins on top of it, you can't ask them to learn about Backstage. You want to give some like core APIs that they can use to build stuff. You want to help them find the right tools needed to build plugins. So that's the main complexity that I see, is that you want to support your engineers inside your company, navigate around Backstage and contribute to it. But yes, there are challenges like updates, for example. Backstage just hit 1.0, so it's now GA. But yeah, updates can be painful. You have to go through change logs and such. Things would break. So yeah, like I would imagine 1, 2 engineers, ideally 3, 4, and also a product manager. Like if you have a developer experience org, then you don't need anyone. But if not, then you're basically starting a developer experience org inside a company.
Fantastic. I'm going to take one last question. It is 1 o'clock, and Steve asks again. So a lot of those YAML kind of schemas or the specs we saw looked like they were like kind of in an alpha state. Do you imagine big changes coming to those schemata that are backing those resources used in used in Backstage?
So those schemas have been here for 2 years, so they haven't changed. We just went Backstage 1.0 was just released, so I think things would be much stable now. The schemas don't change; the implementation of the plugins change. So that's why they were alpha, that catalog can break in your company. So yeah, I don't expect schemas to change. I expect the plugins to be more stable and the whole system to be more stable now.
All right. Fantastic. Well, that's time for us here. Great talk. You can tell by the quality of all the questions we got here. This was really interesting to our community. So Himanshu, we really want to thank you again for joining us here in Madison, all the way from Stockholm. I know it's late in the evening there, so we'll let you go, and we'll let everybody else here in the US get back to their 1 o'clock meetings. But thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is great.
All good. Bye.